Hey there, I'm Chappie, and this is Sketching Out Lorcana. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a point in time where the Walt Disney Company was not the biggest media conglomerate in the entire world. There was a moment, and little minor instances here and there since, where they would take just a slight shortcut. That's not to say that the shortcuts were detrimental by any means, it's just a way of saying that they took artistic chances to save some money. Probably the most famous example is the recycling of animations and movies between the 60s and 80s, most of that time being during Disney's so called Dark Ages. Probably the most famous example is Disney's The Sword and the Stone. Go back whenever you get a chance and watch that movie. You'll see multiple instances of animation cells or characters looking like another instance within that same movie. Now, some critics would call that lazy, but there's a psychological reason as to why we might not care too much about those repeated scenes. Within the back of our minds, we can pick up on these instances being similar whether we realize it or not, equating it to another scene and maybe even another, and that turns into a pattern. And that's what we're going to talk about today, patterns. We're going to look at some Disney Lorcana cards today and pick out some patterns within them. So, what are we waiting for? Let's jump into this chapter of Sketching Out Lorcana. Not too long back, I told you guys that I like when art rhymes. There's something appealing about seeing one piece and then seeing another and just something clicks. It's deep within the human psyche that we tend to see two things that correlate and say, oh, that's satisfying. One of my favorite pastimes is watching anime with my wife. We're big into binging some awesome action or rom-com masterpieces. One of our favorite things to do is when we hear a voice we recognize in anime and then stapling that back to another voice that they went to in another anime. It's just so satisfying to recognize the actor or actress's skills like that, to see their range as characters that they portray. Just like with how we take the voices and associate them with another role, we as humans love picking out something within art and tacking it onto something else we saw before, whether that's another art piece or within that same art piece itself. A pattern is the repetition of an element, and within art, a pattern is the repetition of a particular element within an art piece or between art pieces. There's so much within an art piece that can be considered a pattern. If you see a certain hue of green, and then you see it 3 or 4 times within that same art piece, congratulations, you found a pattern. You graduated from the Chappie School of Finding Patterns in Art. I want you to know this is like as good as a doctorate. I'm pretty sure it is. I want to see one of y'all apply for a position as at a hospital with this and see if you can get a head doctor position, please. And please show it to me. If you do that, please. Honestly, there's so many routes we can go with this because there's so many choices that we can pick from on what we can cover. But y'all know me, I like callbacks. I like a good callback to a previous episode of Sketching Out Lorcana. And I think the perfect stepping off point happens to align with a callback. So, back in my video about color theory and ink identity, I mentioned how each ink has that identity that they run with and favor when it comes to the creation of a card's art. In accordance with that observation, you can then look at cards and see how they have their own particular shape language. With that shape language, we can open avenues for patterns to appear. And honestly, there's 2 inks in particular that seem to like those patterns a lot. Chances are that if you're looking for patterns in Disney Lorcana art, you can bet your enchanted Elsa, you heard that right, your enchanted Elsa, that you're going to find them in Amber and Sapphire cards. See, with their shape language, Amber and Sapphire tend to show shapes that interact with one another and weave together. I really like that it's between these two that you find the patterns within. Just like how patterns tend to work with the mind into satisfaction, Amber and Sapphire both like bringing out the identity of their cards heavily. To show what I mean, let's look at Winnie the Pooh having to think. Right off the bat, we're hit with bright colors just upon first glance. There's the technical glyphs of sapphire going to work. They bring your attention straight to them and tell us that there's a logic to the pattern. Even though we don't see it, and it looks like Pooh Bear's trying to reach that conclusion, the colors and the shapes stay similar enough to cause a repetition. They also seem to borrow heavily from the rug that Pooh's thinking on, as if his thoughts are so powerful that the environment is manifesting the power from his intellect. I wonder if he's trying to remember where he put his honey. You see that honey right there? Why does he put like fistfuls of honey in his mouth? That's like if I like drink soy sauce or something, right? Or if I guess if I took fistfuls of honey. Why'd I bring up soy sauce? Next, let's branch on over to Pongo, determined father. Do you like how I said branch on over? Did you see why I said that? Pongo is looking fierce in this picture. And just as I mentioned moments ago, we see a pattern of branches formed behind him. They're not one for one the same. They're not a perfect replica like they copied and pasted the branches. But our eyes see those movements and shapes and see the interwoven bands of Pongo's determination manifested within his setting. A little Easter egg of sorts. I like with this card is that you can see all of the Dalmatian puppies from Into the Inklands, like the ones that got their own cards. You can see them down at the bottom in the card art. Each one of the puppies that you see, they got a card. Isn't that cool? I love that. Let's get a glimpse at a newer favorite of mine. Here's Mufasa, ruler of Pride Rock. I would never, never, never shut up about the amazingness that is this card's enchanted version. But this original legendary is just as magnificent. What I'd like to take note of in this piece are those illuminated glyphs of sacred geometry circling around him. While it's reminiscent of the patterns we see in pieces like the Winnie the Pooh card we saw earlier, what really shines about this version is how it seems to dip into a pattern more reminiscent of nature. Instead of circles, Mufasa is surrounded by the blooms of flowers, and the rings surrounding him seem to mirror the ripples of water rather than magical glyphs or man-made etchings. For not being an enchanted card, that detail's enchanting all on its own. Let's branch. That doesn't work now. Let's move on over to some other inks that deal with their own patterns. Because while there is a love for patterns in these two inks, that doesn't mean the others were left out of the party. The first one that comes to my mind for this, and actually pulls from inspiration from a world-renowned example of patterns, is I can't talk about this, right? Am I going to be in trouble? Is Mickey Mouse going to get me if it says I can't talk about it. But I will anyway for the sake of art. We Don't Talk About Bruno is an Emerald song that shows Julia Riva taking a cue from MC Escher. Bruno is the center of our piece, and spiraling around him are right side up and inverted staircases that form a pattern that tries to deepen the mystery of the titular character. These repeating elements just add layers and layers to the mystery that Mirabelle feels in the movie about her uncle, and it's given a unique form within Julia's art. Let's jump over to a popular name, but not for the card you're thinking of when I mentioned said name. Let's look at Diablo, Faithful Pet. Right off the bat, you can tell that the glimmer of Diablo is different, just like his more devoted heralding version. While his legendary card takes the form of Maleficent's Dragonfire, this Diablo takes the form of her enchanted briars. And if you look closely, the briars aren't haphazard in forming the raven. They're set into a pattern that seems to make a bit of sense with how he's constructed. It really gives a texture to him once you have a look at the card. Speaking of texture, I think it's important to note how texture and patterns are kind of linked in a way. Texture helps solidify a pattern that we may absent-mindedly brush off without even realizing it. And texture goes a long way in making sure you know what's creating said pattern. To prove my point, let's look at Magic Broom, the big sweeper. Now, right from the moment I put this on the screen, you could probably identify the pattern of light coursing from the broom and into the stonework around it. but I want to focus on the stones. If you look at how they're painted and drawn, they're given the simplest smudges of cracks and crevices and imperfections that let us see that art and say, oh yeah, the broom's in a stone hallway. Because sure, maybe we could look at a similar piece with just simple colors and line work that's laid out in the same patterns and think the same way. But it's that attention to the dips and imperfections that helps us recognize the stone. I've mentioned this card before, but I feel like the conversation should bring us back to Jim Hawkins, Space Traveler. This piece feels so dynamic and really gives us a feeling of movement like I mentioned in our last chapter. But I want to focus more so on the backdrop rather than dealing with Jim. Behind everyone's favorite treasure enthusiast is a sail. And yeah, we get it. He's on a pirate ship. We get the hints from the ropes and the mast he's on, and all these details that set the setting in stone. But it's the pattern on the sail that takes it a step further. Just the lightest bloom of light coming from the line work gives this pirate ship a more futuristic feeling, as if we can hear the hum sounding off of the space sail. Back in Emerald, we have the Cheshire Cat from the Shadows. I have always thought this was such a cool and interesting art piece. What adds to that interest and coolness is how Jeff Murchie helps us line the pieces in the construct of this glimmer. The Cheshire Cat has become part of the scenery, parts of him stuck in an illusory invisibility, and the rest crafted from wood and hedgework. Yet again, it's the placement of the tree trunk behind and beside the cat, and blending the line work and colors together to help us realize this unusual and chaotic combo. I can't help but be reminded of Alice's Curious Labyrinth, which is an Alice in Wonderland hedge maze in Disneyland Paris that has a large Cheshire Cat face created from the hedgework of the maze. I really like to believe that's a little low-key Easter egg. Jeff, if you're... I doubt he's watching, but if you can confirm or deny, just let me know. That'd be cool. The last bit concerning patterns that I really wanted to take note of within Disney Lorcana actually deals with rarity. And not just any rarity, the enchanted rarity. Why am I bringing this up? Why am I talking about enchantments? Am I talking about the pretty holographic patterns? Nah. I want to talk about how there's a trend of enchanted cards carrying over elements from their corresponding initial art piece to keep the glimmer consistent. This is a pattern that just personally speaks to me and just aesthetically clicks gears in my brain just right. What do I mean by this? What am I talking about? Chappie. Y'all are all Chappie. Bruh, what are you yapping about, dude? He's lost his mind. He's finally gone cuckoo. I'm more so not talking about a pattern within the art pieces. I'm talking about a pattern between art pieces. Like I said in the beginning, I love when art rhymes. Let me give you an example that's near and dear to my heart, just to get the ball rolling, get the conversation going. Let's talk about Scar Vengeful Lion. I love both of these cards so absolutely much. I love the pompous and smug aura that both capture beautifully within Scar, but it's the similarities that really show the pattern. In both pieces, we have the craggy setting, reminiscent of Be Prepared from The Lion King. We also have that steam rising to show the possible volcanic activity, and there's the icing on the cake. Both pieces have Scar. Just kidding. It's not that. Both pieces have that Simba drawing that we all know and love. Heck, I've got that tattooed on me. But it's not only the similarity, it's the claw marks purposefully driven and scratched through it in both that really just... God, that's perfect. It's brutally significant and symbolic of who Scar is as a character, and both pieces capture that perfectly. Another example brings us back to Julia Riva for the original art, and now we've got Christian Romero's Enchanted of Genie on the job. The similarities between these two harken back to the similarities with Scar's card. We've got the genie holding one of the Sultan's guards. To kind of put a kick into it, both art pieces have the guard dropping his scimitar. Just another crumb of chef's kiss. Exquisite. What the heck is exquisite? Just another, just another crumb of exquisite detail. What the heck is exquisite? You've got the genie's magic taking on a vibrant emerald color to honor the ink. And the setting helps it all together. When I first saw these cards, I thought he was in the Sultan's Palace in Agrabah. But the more I observed the architecture, the more I put the pieces together that he's probably pulling this all off in the Great Illuminary. And it's just got that splendid curvy style you see in Arabic architecture. It made me kind of link the two. And last, but certainly not least, it's time, guys. I've talked about this every now and then. I've wanted to do this for a while, and I teased it a while back when I mentioned cards I want to cover at some point. God, I don't even remember the video I said this in, but I want to show some love to a character that gets so much love in Lorcana. Belle, strange but special, is yet another instance of the enchanted card carrying over aspects from the original piece. While Alice Pisoni's original legendary art draws most of its light to Belle and the architecture in the background, with the sapphire glints and whatnot, you can still see glints of details behind her. There's the architecture of the two solidifying Belle's setting within the Great Illuminary. Not only that, but we also see the sapphire glyphs and sacred geometry carrying over between the two, even mirroring those glyphs' particular construction of bold lines with small circles along the lines. And then, to top it all off, Belle's icing on the cake. Just like you had Scar's claw marks going through Simba's drawing, or the scimitar falling out of the guy's hand in both genie cards. In both Belle cards you get books. Not only the book in Belle's hand, but both pieces show the astounding library she set in. Again, it's just absolutely magical. Because, of course, Belle from Beauty and the Beast would be surrounded by books. It's yet another detail of love that we see put painstakingly into Disney Lorcana. It's why we see Belle gallivanting through scores and scores of books within a library. It's why we see the whimsical and funny nature of Genie carry over into the Great Illuminary. And it's why we see that no matter who summoned the particular version of the Glimmer, or which version of the Glimmer it is, there's always going to be that disdain hidden within Scar for his family. And this is the true final pattern I want to hit on. The love for Disney laced into each art piece for this wonderful trading card game that we've come to know and love. It's such a spectacular element that can't be skipped over. It makes every single one of these cards amazing. No matter the abilities, the cost, the willpower, the strength, how much lore it gets, no matter what any of that says, all of these cards are wonderful in their own right. And they're all good. They're all amazing cards. Every single one of them. To the lowest vanilla common, to the legendary with an enchanted version that costs $8,000, $50,000, whatever. On that note, I'm gonna let you guys go for now. Thank you so much for swinging by to learn more about patterns. Hope you guys stay safe, you keep on questing, and I'll see you real soon.